Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Places We'll Go show. Well, what can I say? What a treat we have for you today. Professor David Aaker, an absolute luminary in the marketing industry. Welcome, David.
Glad to be here.
Well, it truly is fabulous to have you here. So, anybody need this introduction? But I mean, at one level, David is Vice Chair of Profit, which is ultimately helps businesses to grow, and we can come back to that. But arguably, you are the father of modern branding. And we've had the likes of Byron Sharp and Mark Ritson and Philip Kotler on, and you are absolutely up there as one of the legends of the industry, and recognized as perhaps the authority on branding. Many people will be familiar with your brand vision model. You've won numerous awards. You're in the Hall of Fame with the AMA, the American Marketing Association, for those who aren't familiar. You've received in 2020 the Sheth Foundation Medal for exceptional contribution to marketing scholarship and practice. Professor Emeritus at the Haas School of Business, UC Berkeley. Multiple awards, speaking, thought leadership, written a few books. We'll come back to that. Not least Building Strong Brands. Those books have been converted into 18 languages, sold over 1 million copies. I could go on, but you ultimately have given lots of guidance and inspiration to many marketing leaders all around the world. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, to hear about the man, the way you think, and your pearls of wisdom to anybody trying to make a career in marketing. So fabulous to have you on the show.
Glad to be here.
David, it's a real special moment for us here. So just from me, a big thank you. I'm going to kick off by asking you, now clearly you've had a remarkable journey in the field of branding and marketing. So, what initially sparked your interest in the field, and what really has kept you passionate about it for all these decades?
Well, I feel sorry for those people in accounting and finance and manufacturing. I mean, branding is so fun and so interesting, and it's kind of the story behind all the big successes at the end of the day, usually. But I really kind of solidified my interest in when I was in undergraduate school at MIT, and I took a course in advertising, and it was a case course, and we would go into these companies and brands and figure out what they needed to stand for and how to bring it to life. And I just thought that was fascinating, and so that was really where it started.
So a bit of serendipity, but ultimately maybe meant to be. And so you've had an amazing career. So I suppose I'm going to cut to the chase in one sense, in terms of what are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned about building successful brands?
I came to believe that companies were too focused on short-term financials, and they weren't building assets. And that was really the key to long-term strategy. So I sort of sit back, this was in the late 80s, and I said, well, I want to devote my career in that direction. And what assets should I help them build? And I did a study in which I showed that 3 of the top sustainable advantage dimensions were branding. Brand equity was just emerging. It was emerging because the marketing people of the day had become frustrated because their strategy of just gaining market share at all costs, which came out of the BCG framework, that was the strategy sort of paradigm of the day, wasn't working, and in fact it was in some cases destroying brands. And so they decided that they got to get back to some sort of growth paradigm, and sort of their logic said that it's really got to be about brands, and we need to build brand equity. But nobody knew what brand equity was, and so I wrote my first branding book, which was called Managing Brand Equity, in which I kind of defined brand equity. And more than that, I really pointed out how all the dimensions of brand equity, how they led to a successful business and a successful strategy.
I'm really intrigued about the book that you wrote about managing brand equity, and particularly maybe talking a little bit about what you saw were the key dimensions and levers of brand equity and growth, and whether you think that's shifted at all through time.
Yeah. Well, my conceptualization of brand equity has evolved a little bit, but the structure is basically still the same. But instead of brand awareness, I now talk about brand relevance. So brand relevance is visibility, but it's also credibility. So to be relevant, you have to be credible. You have to say that, I don't know if I'll choose this brand, but I think that it can do the job. And there's no reason that I would exclude it from my choice set. And so brand, I wrote a book on brand relevance. I wrote another one on owning game-changing categories, which is all about what you really want to do is to become the most relevant brand, or even the only relevant brand. That's in fact the only way to grow. So relevance is really important. It's a little different than I had it before. The second dimension is image, and with respect to image, I had broken out perceived quality, but I put that under the image umbrella. And I also emphasize that there's a functional and emotional element to image. And so that's a little bit nuanced. But the third thing I did, and what's really changed things dramatically, is when I included brand loyalty as a dimension of brand equity. And heretofore, brand equity was awareness and image, and it was something you could delegate to the ad agency because it was really a communication task. But when I included brand loyalty, first of all, it makes sense. If you're going to buy a brand, what you're really buying is the loyalty of the brand people that are affiliated with the brand. You're buying the community, you're buying a loyal base. So loyalty just struck me as being something that really you had to include in brand equity. And again, when you make that judgment, it really changes everything, because now it's not something you just delegate to an ad agency. It's just not a communication task. It now involves everybody in the company. It involves the people that are developing the products, the people that are, helping people use the products or use the service. It's the service experience. It's everything that affects the decision to stay with the brand, to tell others of the brand, to become a brand advocate.
I want to come on to something that you would be very close to your heart, given it's your latest book, which is in and around the role of purpose-driven brands. Now, in amongst practitioners here today, we flip and flop sometimes in and around whether brands, and all brands, truly need a purpose front and center of what they do. And you take a classic example of Unilever in recent times. There's been, on the one hand, a movement towards actually having brand purpose at the center of all their brands in their various categories and portfolios. And then probably just a little bit of late, maybe there's been a slight U-turn moment there and thinking about it more pragmatically. And I'd love to get your take on the role of purpose in the context of a brand, and whether you believe it's required for every brand to have a purpose at the heart of what it does.
Yeah, I'm just heartbroken about the potential for Unilever to back away from their leadership position. I wrote a blog on that, and I don't know if it's up yet, but it's really really tragic. If you take Unilever, first of all, this was all started by a writer, I think at Wall Street Journal or someplace, who said Hellman's has no business spending all this money. I mean, give me a break. I mean, how uninformed, how stupid was that? I mean, if you want to take a shot at one of their brands, it should not be Hellman's. My God, first of all, they're pretty energy and refreshing. The core message of Hellman's mayo that's been around for 120 years. They started out as a product that you can take your leftovers, instead of throwing them away, you can make a tasty sandwich. That was been their message for over a century. It's not something that they said, oh, I want to do some do-gooder program, and so I'll divert money from the real business over to that. And the second thing is, they literally got 6 billion views from that shit. And I don't know what percentage, a high percentage costs nothing. Mm. Think of the energy and the image lift and the momentum and the involvement. They absolutely and measurably changed food waste. Measurably changed food waste. So they got a lot of people on the Hellman's team. Make taste, not waste. Can you imagine what that did to the business? I don't have a number for the business, but I'm sure that and this guy at the Wall Street Journal would think that Hellman's, if they had their eye on the ball, they would run ads about mayo and how it's, with the ingredients and how it makes it smooth on the bread. I mean, really? But anyway, and if you go back to Unilever's and Paul Polman, who I think is a hero, he never said everybody had to have a purpose. He never said that. He's got a brand named Axe. They went 6 years without a purpose. He said every brand should consider having a purpose, and if they can find one that works and helps them, they should do it. He never said they had to have a purpose. That's the most ridiculous thing in the world. And so, but he said, if you do have a purpose that's working and everything, you can become a sustainable brand. You have the prestige within Unilever to be a sustainable brand. If you don't, do whatever you want to do. It's your business. You don't have to have a purpose, or at least a social purpose. And so Axe finally they looked in their mirror and they said, first of all, I'm a little uncomfortable going to these international meetings of Unilever and people looking at me funny, and so I don't have to do anything. But besides that, it turns out my key sort of point of difference is that I'm helping young men attract women, and I'm being a humorous person, and therefore by extension they're a humorous person and they go along with the joke, and that wasn't working anymore because in these days and times it just didn't sound very cool anymore. So they were in need of something else, so they changed their thing, and it's now more about men's reaching their ambition or reaching their full potential, and Axe can help you do that, and so now and then they became a sustainable brand because said, yeah, got a social purpose. Well, it wasn't because Paul Polman said you have to have a social purpose. That's not how it works. And that's not how it worked for anybody. I think everybody should consider a social purpose. And one reason is that the key to success now is to have differentiation, to have a way to attract and to have energy. And if you make mayo, it's damn hard to get energy and engagement. It's a jar on the shelf. It's always been there. How can you create energy for that? So you make this make taste not waste program with this Super Bowl ad where there's a linebacker crushing a grandmother that's about to throw away wasted food, and it goes viral. And that's energy. That's visibility. That's image. That's engagement. And how are you going to get it any other way? Just you tell me, and you tell me why that was somehow against capitalism. I mean, it's not only disheartening, it's just because these guys don't understand branding, they don't understand marketing, they don't understand strategy, they're not conversant with a business, and they're making these judgments.
Yeah. I mean, that's clearly an emotive subject. And I'm with you that social purpose is multidimensional and you mentioned relevance, it can give a brand relevance. So the question I was going to ask on the back of that, you've already quoted Axe and Hellman's. What is your favorite brand? And I don't mean the favorite brand that you buy the most, but your favorite brand in terms of they have consistently applied the models and the theory that you espouse. Who's up there at the top in terms of over time doing that on a consistent basis?
That's a good question. I don't know, but since top of mind for me is whenever my last book was on, and this was, social programs, and I think Unilever is just phenomenal. I mean, I think the Dove program is probably the most impressive program, and that took a company or a business within Unilever that's doing $2.6 billion is now doing 6.5, and it is all on the back of a social program. There's just no question about it. It's not because they ran ads saying their soap is pure, floats better, or it's got more, disease prevent. It was about the Real Beauty program, the self-esteem program, and now they got a program with Nike, a joint program about the use of sport and self-esteem. It's the exposure, the energy, the image lift, the engagement has been phenomenal. And I think, if there's one brand story in the last 2 decades, I would say it's the Dove Real Beauty program.
What a wonderful example to pick on, David. Honestly, it is the ore of the industry, I absolutely have to say. I want to turn a little bit in and around the role of emerging brands, particularly because in the last number of years, one would suggest that with the rise of e-commerce and D2C, as well as the barriers dropping across media, particularly with the rise of social and the like, it gives emerging brands a bigger place and space to potentially compete with larger counterparts. And I wondered if you believe that to be true, or whether you still think the biggest brands always have the biggest advantage. And perhaps second to that is, what advice would you give to emerging brands as they are trying to come up and compete?
Well, if you look at these big giant brands of the day, I mean, think of the grocery chains, for example, or the department store chains, or the discount chains, the Costco's of the world, and then of course Amazon, or it's whatever is in Asia that forms that function, and it seems impossible to compete against it. And indeed, they engage in some practices that really are the evils of monopoly. But I when I wrote this book, Game-Changing Subcategories, I had a chapter in there about Amazon, and a section of that chapter, how do you compete against Amazon? And I came up with 6 ways to compete, and showed examples of how people had employed these 6 ways to compete. One of them is you show passion and credibility within an area. I used the example of Casper, a mattress company. They make mattresses. Well, Amazon sells mattresses, but Amazon is it's just a transaction company. It's a distribution company. They don't give a shit about mattresses. And Casper is not only a mattress company, they're a sleep company. They're focusing on sleep. They have a website with meditation programs. They've got a mattress that is designed for sleep. And so if you want to buy a mattress from somebody that that really knows mattresses and understands the sleep angle, you would buy from Casper. So, Amazon can't compete with that. Amazon is a transactional organization, very good at it, but that's what they are. And then you have a simplicity. Company Dollar Shave went into the e-commerce razor blade business, and they were so successful. 4 years later, they sold their company for $1 billion. So this company, Amazon, somebody said that there was 20,000 options for buying razor blades on Amazon. 20,000 options. And at Dollar Shave Club, there are 3 options. Now, do you really want 20,000 options to buy razor blades? And so just the simplicity is another. The third thing is a personality. Dollar Shave Company is this completely irreverent, feisty underdog. They ridicule Amazon. They ridicule the drugstores where you buy stuff, and they send out with their the e-commerce product a little booklet of humorous asides and so on that you're supposed to use when you go or read when you're going to the bathroom. And they're just very feisty underdogs, funny people like that. And Amazon, there's no way Amazon can be a feisty underdog. They're the big gorilla. And then personal touch. I mean, Amazon, you can't call up Amazon. You can contact Dollar Shave Club. It's they have a personal relationship, and then a company like Warburg Parker can makes eyeglasses. They can set up retail shops, or they can have a retail presence. Amazon can't do that. They made a try with books, but they dialed that back. But so anyway, there are things you can do that will look at the Amazon liabilities or handicaps. And these companies have been extremely successful.
Yes. So one of the things that I noticed is that you've emphasized the power of signature stories, and you've kind of told us a little bit about that. But more generally, how can brands effectively craft these signature stories? Is there a methodology or a mindset or a practice that you would advise?
It turns out it's really hard. So I make the premise that, if you try to run an ad or a video or something, first of all, people got information overload and there's media clutter, and it just, their coping strategy is to ignore you. And if you do get through, their strategy then is to counter argue, to be skeptical and say, yeah, but you're just trying to sell me something. So what do you do with those twin challenges? Well, it turns out stories get through. Because if you have a really interesting story, a story that's so interesting people will share it, it's just a story. Why would you counter argue a story? So stories can get through, and so it's pretty easy. And people nod their head. They buy that. You don't need a lot of data, although we have hundreds of psychological studies that show that. But you don't need a lot of studies. It's just common sense. Stories work. People know that. You remember stories. You don't remember things that don't have stories. So if you want to communicate facts, embed them in a story, or use the story to motivate the facts, or to use the facts to tee up the story, to illustrate these facts, So anyway, you still can communicate facts in the context of a story or using a story. So then a lot of people are so preoccupied with their communication objective, they don't think of stories. But if you get them to think about stories, It's still hard. I mean, there's a nonprofit I work with, and I meet with this CEO a couple of times a year, and I always talk about stories. And she said, "Yeah, we're working on it." And it turns out it's hard to find stories. And it turns out that even if you find stories, they come to life. You don't have a ready-made creative team that can polish and produce the story into an article or a video that will really work. And so there's very few firms that have sort of closed the loop and have somebody out there looking for stories and a little team that can turn them around.
David, I'd like to come on to an age-old debate that sits within our industry, and one that's perhaps backed up by some level of empirical evidence both ways, but I'd love to get your take on this, which is the role between brand differentiation versus brand distinctiveness, and what you believe leads to greater effectiveness as a consequence of following one versus the other path.
I don't see any difference. What do you see as the difference?
So what the thought leaders suggest is that differentiation is when you are able to earmark yourself as a clear point of difference from the competitive set around you using a variety of different USPs, perhaps product, place, price, promotion USPs, but, geared against versus competition. Whilst distinctiveness, on the other hand, is all around the distinct brand assets that you have, whether that be packaging, logo, color schemes, celebrity style endorsements, etc., that keep you looking in a very sort of unique way that builds muscle memory.
Yeah.
And, there's two sides of that coin.
In my book, Only Game-Changing Subcategories, I point out that the only way to grow, literally the only way, with almost no exceptions, is to provide something that's so distinctive that other organizations and brands are simply not relevant, or at least they're much less relevant. And that means that you may still like those brands. But I would love your sedan if I'm a car manufacturer, but I now want to buy an electric vehicle. And so, despite the fact I love you to death, I'm not buying what you're making anymore. I'm buying something else. And so, you have to be relevant. That means you have to make what they're buying, and it also means there's an opportunity to create a whole new subcategory. I call it. It's something that have what I call must-haves. And so it has 1, 2, or usually 4 or 5 must-haves, and that's something that a customer will maybe insist on, or at least have a high preference for something that has it. So if some other organization makes a product that lacks one of these must-haves, he will not be relevant, or be much less relevant. And so in terms of having the credibility of being able to make what they want to buy. And so that's a real way to win. That's a real way to grow. You don't win by having my brand preferred over your brand. You win because my brand is the only brand that does what you want to have done. And so it's from a brand preference competition to a brand relevance competition. And now that I think what they're getting at there is to be distinctive, is to win in the brand relevance round. To be differentiated is to win in the brand preference round. And so I wrote 2 books about that, and I really totally agree with that. And I started looking at Japanese beer data for 30 years, and I found there was only 4 times the market share trajectory in that whole time period. And they were all when whole new subcategories were found, like Asahi Dry. And you look at other categories and you feel the same thing. You look at computers, you look at software. A spurt of growth always associated with, I guess, what you're calling brand distinctiveness. But what I would call having a must-haves to define a new subcategory.
Love it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Owen, inspiring and insightful. We've come to the end of time. It's gone in a flash. I'm going to end on the point about books, and it's either, what is the book you're working on now? What is the book you haven't yet written or you dream of writing, given that it's such a core part of the way that you've educated the world around marketing and brand?
Well, this book, The Pursuit of Purpose-Driven Driving, is kind of occupied me since it's been out for now a year and a quarter, and I spent that time trying to explain to people why the ideas are worthwhile. And that's sort of typical for me. After I write a book, I need to have what happens is it's kind of tragic in a way, because about 6 or 8 months after I've written the book, everything clicks into place. And I wish I could start writing at that point. And I usually think I should have had a different title even. But anyway, it's really gratifying to have the ideas. After I give, dozens, if not hundreds, of talks about it and write articles off it and so on, and the central ideas really crystallize, and that's really fun. I think my next book might be maybe I'll revise a brand portfolio book, or maybe I'll write another book or some articles around the idea of the silver bullet brands and the power of branded differentiators, branded energizers, and so on. Because I think that is really a key to branding success. It's a key to strategy success.
David, wow. So much firepower still to go. The gusto of continued writing and authorship is just so inspiring. Thank you. I think we've come to the end of the segment here today. And what a wonderful segment it is. You are a true luminary in what you've done, what you've achieved. And the concepts that you articulated from, brand equity right through to all the various books, multidimensional branding, portfolio management, the purpose, the purpose of brands and the heart of that, social programs, and all the like, are really something that you've spearheaded. You're the one who's trailblazed this space. And, to that end, it's a massive pleasure to have spoken to you here today. It's a privilege that we get to do so and learn where some of these embryonic concepts have really originated from, that we now see in the mainstream of branding here today. So to that extent, you truly are the father of modern branding. And with that note, just want to say another massive thank you for all your time that you've spent with us today. It's been a great privilege and a truly insightful experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to have done it.